to honor you. Lord, with all my heart, I worship you. All I have within me, I give you praise, and all that I adore is in you. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake. Lord, have your way in me. This is my desire, to honor you. Lord, with all my heart, I worship you. All I have within me, I give you praise, and all that I adore is in you. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. Live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake. Lord, have your way in me. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake. Lord, have your way in me. Amen. You may be seated.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I wear many hats tonight. In case you haven't noticed, Eric isn't here, unfortunately. He is still sick, so you could be in prayer for him. If he feels better, Lord willing, we'll continue our series in Zechariah next week. Though keep in mind the Sunday after that, the 27th, we won't have any services here. That'll be the Wednesday, I believe, after Christmas. So that's just a time that we give to everyone to spend time with your families. So do keep that in mind coming up here in the next couple weeks. So I don't know how far we'll go, but if I was to guess, we'll probably start a little, or we'll end sooner rather than later tonight. But I wanted to talk, I've titled our message tonight, The Distraction of Busyness. So quick question to start off our night. How many of you would say you've been busy lately? Everyone, yeah. It kind of comes with the territory of the month being December. This message tonight, excuse me, it's just been a blessing to me studying for it, so I hope it's a blessing for you listening to it. Same. I've felt very busy this past week and in the past just moment of time. Maybe you're busy with work or it's DIY projects at home. Maybe just because it's December, you're busy Christmas shopping. Haven't done any Christmas shopping. Not that I would know anybody who hasn't done that, but just throw out a random idea. You're trying to get all your presents bought. You're trying to get the house ready for when your family comes over. Maybe you're getting ready for a new baby next year. Just throw out another random example. It's very much not hard to be busy outside of December, let alone now. And I feel like I thought as I was studying for this, our culture really does promote busyness to kind of keep up with everything, that everything is on a time clock, and if you don't constantly try to beat that time clock, you're then behind somehow. And you got to get that sort of instant gratification, and you kind of got to keep up with everything. Sort of this idea that the clock is always ticking. We're always overworking, and in that, as Christians, I feel like it can be very easy to become spiritually undernourished when we try to keep ourselves busy like that. Don't get me wrong, being busy can be good, can be fruitful. Being productive is not a bad thing. When your wife tells you to pick up your dirty clothes off the floor, you got to say, "Hey, I gotta relax. I can't be doing work right now." That's not the point of our message tonight. However, it is possible to go around as Christians in circles so much that we don't get to experience. We get to experience a job well done when we do work, but it's also important that we get to experience God's peace when we don't work. And so I think that's really important. And that peace is what God gives us as believers. Busyness, instead of being a Christian, can become kind of our character trait. You're the busy one. Nobody asks you to do anything because they know you'll always be busy. There's always something going on. And to Satan, that's a great tool to use against us. Just like laziness, busyness can also be used for his benefit, not ours. And it's all the same to him. He'll use either or both to distract us from God and to minimize our usefulness in the kingdom. I came across this quote while I was studying for tonight. Satan may be the prince of darkness, but he is also the duke of distraction. And as Christians, I think it's important for us not to get kind of swept away by the riptide of time. Romans 12, verse 2 says, and do not, and many of you may know this verse, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that it may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Throughout the Bible, there is a high value to rest and peaceful living. I was noticing this, my wife and I have been reading through the New Testament this past year, and I always thought it funny, sort of to kind of take a note of the times in the New Testament, specifically in Matthew, where you note in Jesus' earthly ministry, the amount of times that Jesus is just trying to get away from crowds, I always think is kind of funny. Matthew 5, verse 1 says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after that he sat down, and his disciples came with him. Later on in Matthew chapter 8, verse 18, now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. And then I believe as that goes on, he later discovers once he gets to the other side of the sea, there's another crowd waiting for him. In Mark 6, verse 45, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat, go ahead of him on the other side to Bethsaida while he himself was sending the crowd away. Now, that's not to say Jesus is antisocial, that Jesus is anti-crowd. That's not the case. Feeding of the 5,000 is just one kind of famous example where you get kind of the opposite effect, where it's the disciples that want to kind of shoo everybody away and say, Jesus, we got to get away from this crowd. And it's Jesus that tells the disciples to have everyone sit down before he blesses him with the bread and the fish. But Jesus also saw value away from crowds to be able to regain his physical strength. Right before Jesus feeds the crowd of 5,000 in that same chapter of Mark, Mark chapter 6, verse 30 and 32, the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught, and he said to them, come away by yourselves, secluded place, if I can speak right. For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They went away on the boat to a secluded place by themselves. Beginning of Ecclesiastes also in chapter 3 says, many of you may know that verse, says there's a season, there's a time for everything. And a part of that is, it says there, quote, a time to be silent and a time to speak. It's important to take time and rest and enjoy what God has given us. And sometimes we're called not to act, but just to listen to what God may have to say. And so tonight, with the time I got left, see, I'm already on a roll. It's already 6:20, so we'll be fine. There are two people that I'd like to talk about tonight in the Bible who came to mind, who are sort of busybodies of the Bible. One you may be very well familiar with, and one you may not be, but they were very much, I think, doers first and listeners second. And there are certainly more than two, but these are just two of, I think, the most well-known of the Bible that we'll just look at tonight. So can anyone guess who the first one might be? You know it, Martha. Yep, everybody knows Martha. She's probably the most famous busybody of the Bible, I think. As a refresher, if you'll turn with me to Luke chapter 10, we're going to camp out there for just a second, just to kind of set the stage to where we meet Martha in chapter 10 when she comes into this chapter. At the beginning of the chapter, Jesus sends out 70 people to be testimonies and do great things, miraculous things in Jesus' name. After they report back to Jesus, they tell him, wow, we're really amazed by the supernatural authority they've been given by Jesus. They talk about authority over demons and how they can walk on scorpions and snakes and they can't get hurt, and they think that's really cool. Nothing can harm them. Jesus then tells them the parable of the Good Samaritan in response to a lawyer guy who attempts to try and trip up Jesus about who his neighbor is, which is another passage you might be familiar with. So then it's at this moment we catch up with Martha and Jesus is traveling out with his disciples, and they find themselves in the village where Martha and her sister Mary live. So let's start there towards the end of the chapter 10 in verse 38 till the end of the chapter. Now as they were traveling along, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Then tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary, for Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. So, picture, if you will, because it's December, you are preparing for a Christmas dinner with you and your family, and you're hosting at your house. And if your house is like mine, the current state of your house is never sufficient. There's always cleaning to be done, sweeping to be done, dusting to be done. Everything's got to be moved, put away, cooked, baked, prepared for everyone to come to your house. Finally, your family arrives, you invite them in, everyone gets settled in. Your house is probably in the best shape it's ever been this whole year. You have a great feast for everybody, the table's set, and as a matter of fact, you did this all yourself, and you're pretty proud of yourself. And then one of your family members comes up to you and says, you know, all this wasn't really necessary. How would you feel? You might feel a little offended. You might have some harsh words for them. And I'm sure this is how Martha felt. And Martha always kind of gets the bad rap when we kind of tell her story, but I think she went a lot through what we as believers go through. We just want to be recognized. We just want to do good things. We want to feel valued. We want to feel appreciated with our service. And I think that's a lot of how Martha's heart was. She just wanted to be a good servant. But there's a key distinctive that the Bible points out there in verse 40 that I think sort of defines the underlying problem of Martha's service. There, verse 40, it says, but Martha was distracted with all her preparations. God calls her service a distraction. None of us, of course, would probably call our service a distraction. Probably quite the opposite. We would probably think pretty highly of our service. My service is necessary, we might think, or stuff needs to be done. I got to clean up the house so everybody can come over. But that's what God calls it to Martha, and Martha says back to Jesus, I'm doing this all on my own, which I'm sure made her feel more proud. But Martha clearly thinks that she's in the right here, and that she's just trying to be the best hostess. It's implied in this passage that she's in charge of the household here, and that she's the older sister to Mary. And I'm sure that while Jesus comes in and Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus and Martha's getting all this stuff, I'm sure she was giving her the New Testament version of the side-eye. I'm sure Martha wasn't subtle about how she felt towards Mary. And eventually, Martha just kind of gives up all sense of subtlety. And out in the open, she just tells Jesus, hey, it's not fair that my work go unrecognized and that Mary goes unpunished. So let's continue on and read Jesus' response to Martha. Verse 41, but the Lord answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but the one thing is necessary, for Mary's chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. I'm sure Jesus' response was kind of a shock to Martha. I'm sure she didn't think that it was possible that she'd be in the wrong here. I'm sure she was 100% certain that Mary was in the wrong. Looking back for just a second, verse 39, what's the first thing we see Mary doing when Jesus comes into the house? What's kind of the first thing? Yeah, she sits at her feet. She doesn't prep anything. She goes right to Jesus' feet. She's listening to Jesus' teaching. Mary was thinking of others before herself. She's also able to be, she's not at a distance, she's right at the feet of Jesus, able to focus on his words and not be able to be distracted. Jesus continues by saying, though, Martha, you've done all these preparations, only one thing is necessary, and Mary's doing it. She's listening to my teaching. The good part, the Bible calls it, while Martha just assumed that Mary was just being lazy. In the end, Martha's just trying to be a good hostess, like mentioned earlier, and I'm sure she had the noblest of intentions. But as Jesus' visit goes on, we sort of get to see the cracks in Martha's intentions of her service, and they begin to show, and it quickly sees the focus not on Jesus, but on Martha. And Martha's service becomes very kind of self-centered. And Jesus knew that, which is why he called her out on it. And he knew that Mary's heart was in the right place and that Martha wasn't. Martha, again, just needed to stop and listen. So that's kind of Martha's story. The next sort of doer of the Bible we're going to look at, anyone guess? Bonus points if you can guess it. The next one we're going to look at is Peter. I knew you were going to say that, Gene. I knew that's who you were thinking of. I totally get it. I totally get it. If you'll turn back with me, we'll look at Peter's situation here in Matthew chapter 17. This is, after Jesus tells the disciples, he tells about the cost of their discipleship, and that they, another famous passage, they should take up their cross and follow him. And actually, it's Peter in the previous chapter, chapter 16, that professes Jesus not as John the Baptist or another prophet, as the people suggest, but as Christ and as God's Son. When God asks them who they, the disciples, think that he is, and Jesus calls him blessed. So let's look then at chapter 17, the first, I believe, 8 verses. 6 days later, after Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground and were terrified. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, Get up and do not be afraid. And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. So In this passage, we see Jesus is transformed into this bright figure after he brings with him Peter, James, and John. And also we get to see kind of two heavy hitters of the faith show up, Moses and Elijah, which would be a really cool opportunity to just simply be in the presence. It'd be like being in front of like John Piper and John MacArthur, just two godly men. But that's not where Peter's mind is at. Peter, remember, is a doer, and therefore he doesn't just want to stand by and kind of let things happen. So with Jesus' face like the sun and two godly men alongside him, Peter wants to make sure that they're taken care of. He wants to be a good hostess. He wants to make them a nice place to stay. But unlike Martha, that's my thought audio. But unlike Martha, God stops Peter in his tracks. He doesn't even let him finish speaking, and he sort of interrupts him and kind of puts him in his place. So knowing Peter's heart, God decides to get his attention, and he says there in verse 5, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." You don't exactly know who you're talking with, Peter, is kind of what God is saying. And again, God didn't even wait for Peter to finish what he was saying. He cut him off and sets him straight. But a lot like Martha, God knew Peter's heart, and he knew that his heart was not set on God, but himself. And again, Martha and Peter just wanted to be people of action. They wanted to do things. But that's not what they needed to do. That's not what was fruitful for them. It's not what God had required of them. Most importantly, for their spiritual growth, they needed to just not act, but listen and enjoy the peace of God. The famous verse, we went over it in our series that we did with Team 6 on Sunday nights, Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Don't be anxious about anything. Maybe you're anxious about being busy. Maybe you're anxious about not being busy. Maybe you think you should be busy and you're not doing anything. Those verses also say to pray consistently, to make your requests known to God. And if you do that, verse 7 in that passage says, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." God gives us peace to those who ask for it with a genuine heart, and he calls us to do that. Again in Matthew in chapter 11, verse 28. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Isaiah 55, verse 6 says, "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near." So maybe you're in a season where you need some peace and quiet to seek the Lord. Maybe just so much is going on that you just can't hear the Lord speaking, and just because so much is coming at you. So as we close up a little early tonight, I would just encourage you during this kind of Christmas season, as we're all kind of in busy states of our lives, I'd encourage you to take time to rest, not just physically, but spiritually, that you would call out to God if you're struggling with your busyness. Reach out to brothers and sisters in Christ if you feel like you're just carrying a heavy burden that you can't carry alone. If that's your situation. Because business really can be a distraction from us, I think, and learning. It can keep us from learning what God would have us learn in our lives for His glory. And that's all I've got for you this evening. It's not morning, it's evening now. So we'll cut our live stream and we'll get into some prayer.